Sparked by a financial crisis, the French Revolution broke out in 1789 as enlightened ideals led to the fall of the Bastille and the rise of the Jacobin radicals. In June 1791, Louis XVI, fearing for his safety, attempted to flee Paris with his family in the ill-fated flight to Varennes. Disguised as commoners, they aimed for the royalist stronghold of Montmedy, but were recognized and captured in Varennes, shipped back to Paris and imprisoned. The revolution quickly radicalized, culminating in the Reign of Terror under Robespierre, where thousands, including Louis, Marie Antoinette, and his young children, were killed to defend the revolution. After the revolution cannibalized itself and failed to rectify the economic woes, Napoleon seized power, continuing the wars that destroyed Europe, spreading revolutionary ideals across the continent. Since the overthrow of the Bourbon, France has been under 11 different regimes, cycling between empire, monarchy, republic, and fascism, with just 2 of the 11 lasting over 18 years. Happy Bastille Day to all my French fans. In all honesty, I used to be a big proponent of the French Revolution, until I recently listened to the 10-hour series about the outbreak of it from the Rest is History podcast. I highly recommend you check that out. This is how I feel about it now.
Matter of fact, eat shit. How's that? In fact,
do not use that word in front of my son.
eat shit,
If I
eat
wasn't
shit,
practicing,
eat shit.
I would slap that smug smile.
Definitely eat shit. Eat shit, you can all eat shit.
Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel to help me reach 70,000 subs by the end of July. If you'd like to go a step further, you can also support me on Patreon, where you'll get ad-free viewing, all the maps from the videos, and other exclusive content. Thanks so much. Now, back into the video. History was forever changed in the summer of 1791, as the royals made their desperate bid for freedom. Louis was worn down by the constant humiliations from the revolutionaries that seized his power while he pretended to uphold a hollow constitution to save his life, betraying his sacred oath to defend the faith. Marie Antoinette was vilified for her Austrian heritage, subjected to a mob attempt to murder her with her children, while horrific lies were spread throughout the nation, calling her a lesbian vampire, with people calling to rip her guts out and use them as cockades. Paris was no longer safe for the Bourbon. Late on June 20th, 1791, Louis, Marie Antoinette, their children, and the king's sister, Madame Elizabeth, slipped out of the Tuileries disguised as humble merchants. Instead of the flashy, lumbering carriage that historically got them spotted, they rode in a plain, fast carriage to blend in. This was arranged by the loyal Swedish noble Axel von Versen, Marie Antoinette's trusted ally, who lined up fresh horses and secured safe passage through loyalist networks in towns like Meaux and Chalon. Heeding Versen, Louis stayed hidden inside the carriage, never going out to speak with locals, avoiding the fatal mistake that got him recognized as Saint-Menehould. The nimble carriage dodged busy roads, and Louis' silence kept them unrecognized, promising his family he would wield his power once they sorted this whole mess out. The group stuck to their schedule, no stops for food or rest, racing towards the royalist fortress of Montmedy, where General François-Claude Amour, Marquis de Beuil, waited with loyal soldiers. By dawn of the 22nd, the royal family safely reached Montmedy, welcomed by Beuil's troops, who whisked them to the safety of the Austrian Netherlands under Archduke Charles, Marie's nephew. Back in Paris, the National Assembly, furious at Louis' escape, declared on June 25, 1791, that the king had abandoned his throne and traitorously allied with the Germans, sentencing him to death. This united the Jacobins, Girondins, and Cordeliers into a shaky government. But the move backfired. Royalist uprisings broke out across France, in Brittany, Vendée, Anjou, and Poitou, regions loyal to the church and crown. The army, already weakened by defections and clashing loyalties, shattered. Nearly a third of its officers and soldiers deserted to join Louis. Among them was a young Corsican officer, Napoleon Bonaparte, not yet induced by revolutionary ideals. Disgusted by the Republic's chaos and drawn by the promise of order, Napoleon joined Beuil's forces in the Austrian Netherlands. Leopold II, Marie's close brother and the Holy Roman Empire, met with Prussian King Frederick William II, issuing the Declaration of Pillnitz, declaring war on the revolutionaries. They were joined by King Charles IV of Spain, Louis' Bourbon cousin, who had been plotting with Louis since the revolution began. The dramatic events changed Louis into a proper leader, while Marie Antoinette was hailed as a new Joan of Arc by royalists, becoming a symbol of holy defiance. Her image spread across pamphlets in loyalist strongholds, rallying many to their banners. General Beuil, a practical and disciplined general, organized a strong army of 45,000 French loyalists alongside 30,000 Swiss and German mercenaries. In early August, Billy launched the first major offensive. At the Battle of Chalon-sur-Marne, his forces crushed a Republican army under Jean-Baptiste Jourdan, opening the road towards Reims, which they quickly retook. Simultaneously, 30,000 Prussians under King Frederick William II crossed the Rhine and linked up with Archduke Charles of Austria's 22,000 near Metz, while the Spanish sent 20,000 troops over the Pyrenees under Antonio Ricardos, a grizzled veteran of the War of the Austrian Succession. By September, the Royalist advance accelerated. At Troyes, Charles beat the revolutionary troops under General Kellerman, before crippling them at Sens with Prussian aid. Orleans soon fell after, aided by Catholic peasant militias as Jacques Calentou took control over Nantes. In Aquitaine, the Spanish faced the Republican army under General Vermonville at Toulouse. Weakened by defeats and desertions, the Republicans crumbled against Spanish infantry, forcing their retreat to Lyon, where the revolutionaries of the south regrouped. This enabled the Spanish to take the undefended Mediterranean provincial cities of Nimes, Arles, and Marseille. Once those were garrisoned, they marched north, recovering Avignon for the Pope. Then came the decisive Battle of Melun, where Bully's combined forces delivered a crushing blow just outside Paris. General Lafayette was captured by a young Bonaparte, and the path to the capital lay open. Within days, Paris was encircled. Panic gripped the city as civil disorder, food shortages, and bitter factionalism paralyzed the government. On October 1st, the siege of Paris began as artillery pounded the capital. After 15 days of bombardment, royalists broke through at Montmartre, storming the north. Paris was a bloodbath, with over 50,000 people, soldiers and civilians alike, dying as the royalists had no love or wish to preserve the Parisians, whom they blamed entirely for this madness, permitting Prussian and Austrian barbarity. In the following weeks, they turned their sights on Lyon, the last major Republican stronghold, ignoring their desperate offers for peace. Jacobin-led forces under General Jean-Baptiste Donatien de Vemur, Comte de Richembourg, fortified Lyon with barricades and a fiery resolve. Bully handed some of the siege artillery to Captain Napoleon, whose cunning use of cannons on Fouvieres heights pounded Republican supplies. After 3 weeks of relentless shelling, Lyon fell. Napoleon's role in the victory saw him painted as a noble Corsican devoted to the king and faith, marking the rise of a new royalist officer elite. With Lyon's fall, the revolution was over. The brief 6-month civil war enabled Louis to restore the absolute monarchy of his great-great-grandfather, Louis XIV, the Sun King. The Estates General was abolished as the Bourbon returned to Versailles. The sweeping changes that followed were fierce, calculated, and rooted in a total rejection of the godless, egalitarian chaos of 1789, adopting many of the excellent reforms of Spain's Charles III, rebuilding France into a land where loyalty to the crown, church, and tradition defined all virtue. The revolutionary cry of Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité was replaced by Dieu, Roi, Famille, heralding the new order steeped in nobility and Catholicism. On March 15, 1792, at a grand ceremony at Notre Dame, known as the Sacrum Regisum, Louis renounced his forced concession to the revolutionaries in a solemn liturgy. The cathedral, purged of its blasphemous title as a Temple of Reason, was reconsecrated by papal envoy Cardinal Alessandro Mattei. The nuncio then read Pope Pius VI's bull, Regale Redutum, declaring Clovis, Charlemagne, Godfrey of Bouillon, and Joan of Arc as saints. Their legacies were weaponized to glorify the Bourbon. Priests slain in the Revolution were likewise canonized as the French martyrs. This was no mere ritual. It was the bedrock of Louis's rebirthed France, bound by the Church. In April 1792, the Justice Committee was formed to hunt down former Republicans. Marie Antoinette, scarred by the horrific revolutionary slanders, drove these purges with a vengeance, akin to Catherine de' Medici. Public executions at the Place de Grève, with crowds roaring "Vive le roi" as heads rolled, served as a grim warning to any who dared defy the crown. Robespierre, Danton, Marat, and any suspected accomplices faced the guillotine. The Feuillants, who had pushed for a constitutional monarchy during the Revolution, were forgiven upon oaths of loyalty to the king. The House of Orleans, the Bourbons' treacherous kin, faced Louis's full wrath. Louis-Philippe II, Duke of Orleans, had fueled anti-Bourbon propaganda from his Palais Royal and spread vile rumors about Marie Antoinette, but sealed his fate when he had voted for Louis's death upon his flight. In retribution, the Orleans line was stripped of titles and lands, redistributed to loyal nobles, as their entire bloodline was eradicated. To rebuild the aristocracy, which had been gutted by emigration and revolutionary violence, Louis created new nobility to reward his allies. Emigre nobles who fought in the Civil War reclaimed their estates and gained grander titles. This new elite, unlike the old, prized service over birth, elevating men like Napoleon while binding them to the crown. The peasantry, especially in royalist bastions like Vendée, were hailed as defenders of the throne and altar, rewarded with tax breaks and church-run charities, while their leaders, Henri de Roche-Lacran, Jacques Calentou, etc., were ennobled. Napoleon's heroics at the Siege of Lyon and his general poise throughout the war earned him the rank of Marshal of France. At just 23, Napoleon married into a cadet Bourbon branch, anchoring him to the nobility. The civil constitution of the clergy, which had chained the church to the state, was repealed, and the priests who swore revolutionary oaths were defrocked or exiled. Stolen church lands were returned, and tithes revived, swelling clerical power. Louis, ashamed by his forced betrayal of his sacred oath to protect the church, worked closely with Pope Pius VI, who blamed the revolution on France's lapse in faith. Remaining Huguenot communities in Claverne and Languedoc were crushed, while France renounced any claims on Avignon. Many older French Catholic customs were revived, banning theaters during Lent, stricter Lenten fasts, women veiling during masses, fines for skipping mass, etc. The Jesuits, exiled since 1764, were handed control over most of the schools, teaching loyalty to God, Pope, and King, stamping out any roots of Gallicanism with Ultramontism. A French Inquisition burned revolutionary books and effigies of Jacobin leaders in public squares, purged heretical ideas from the land. Revolutionary notions of nationalism, populism, and conscription were obliterated. The press, once a revolutionary firebrand, was shackled by royal censors, with only crown-approved pamphlets or newspapers allowed, many of which depicted Louis as a new Charlemagne. France's economic woes, worsened by the revolutionary chaos, still loomed large though. Louis founded the Banque Royale de France, modeled on the Bank of England, to try and stabilize finances. Loans from Austria and Spain funded the restoration, but Louis eyed conquest to secure wealth. Napoleon pushed for plans of war in the Rhineland and Italy, promising riches to fill royal coffers. However, with no real political opposition, Louis successfully pushed through his initial reform plans from 1787, creating a universal land tax for all three estates, modernizing internal trade laws, eliminating internal tariffs, abolishing forced labor, as new provincial assemblies to handle regional taxes were established. The French Revolution's failures had a massive impact on the French and Spanish Bourbon colonies of the New World. American revolts, occurring concomitantly with the European developments, as the locals thought Spain and France were preoccupied with Europe, were disastrous. With initial rebel successes in Spanish America, Charles IV promised Louis a return of Louisiana for support in suppressing the revolts, so French armies quickly arrived as the king wanted an easy prestige boost to rally the fractured nation together. Liberal and nationalist dreams were ended as troops and mercenaries flooded the port cities of New Orleans, Cap Francais, Havana, Veracruz, and Cartagena, making short work of the fledgling revolutionaries. Spies soon prowled taverns and docks, burning outlawed pamphlets by exiles like Brissot and Concordat amid sermons cursing the sins of 1789. Spanish viceroys wielded tribunals to interrogate potential conspirator elites, executing Jacobin exiles, bolstered by new garrisons from the mainland. Joint Franco-Spanish naval patrols blocked seditious texts, working with the church in the counter-revolutionary crusade. Sadly, this lacked slavery in the French Caribbean, where loyalists, with metropolitan reinforcements, crushed the Haitian revolt, continuing the rich plantations. Caste hierarchies remained across Spanish America, funneling sugar, coffee, silver, and tobacco to Madrid, while the new French governor of Louisiana built forts and surveillance webs. These rigorous actions ensured that by 1800, France and Spain's colonies stood strong as revolutionary dissent was crushed, mercantilism reigned, and loyalty to the crown stood above all. By the turn of the 19th century, France was completely transformed as Louis's reforms had taken root. But the financial woes continued, so the king finally heeded the advice of his brilliant marshal, Napoleon Bonaparte. War was the answer. The armies were ready, and soon the continent would be reminded that France, not Prussia, Russia, Austria, or Britain, ruled Europe and the globe. Austria, now led by Emperor Francis II, Marie Antoinette's nephew, was eager to retake the rich province of Silesia stolen by Prussia back in 1742. The Habsburgs had likewise been pressuring Louis for war, renewing the 1757 Treaty of Versailles, offering to cede the Austrian Netherlands for French troops to capture Silesia. This alliance soon added Russia under Tsar Alexander I, a fierce champion of absolutism, with the promise of Polish lands taken by Prussia in the partitions. The Russians had fought alongside Austria in the 7 Years' War, and expected the Prussians to get trounced without Frederick, so wanted to partake in the spoils. Spain quickly followed suit, promised a share of the lucrative British Caribbean possessions. Jamaica alone had been worth more than the entire 13 colonies, as the West Indies accounted for up to half of all overseas profits for the Redcoats. Against this alliance stood Prussia, Britain, Sweden, Hanover, and Bavaria. Napoleon, now 34 and the cornerstone of France's military might, took command as the lead marshal. His post-Civil War reforms had forged the French army into a disciplined juggernaut under his genius, blending careful stratagems and lightning-fast strikes, a skill that would shape the war's course. In April 1803, the war erupted as French armies stormed through the Rhineland, making light work of the Bavarians. Napoleon then linked up with the Austrian armies storming into Silesia, targeting the Prussian strongholds at Breslau and Glogau. The opening clash, the Battle of Liegnitz, pitted Napoleon's 80,000 against 60,000 Prussians under General Gerhard Lebrecht von Bulcker. Napoleon placed heavy cannons on the Katzbach River heights, hammering Prussian lines with deadly precision. French cavalry then swept around Bulcker's flanks, shattering his defenses. On April 22nd, Liegnitz fell to Bonaparte. Leaving the Austrians in Silesia, he then marched through Germany, crippling any who opposed him, as he eventually knocked the Bavarians out after taking Munich. Spain's role proved vital early on, as Spanish ships, joined by French squadrons, challenged Britain's naval grip on the North Sea. Russia's entry in July 1803 raised the stakes, as Tsar Alexander's armies, under General Mikhail Kutuzov, marched into Prussia's Polish lands. Prussia, however, was no easy foe. Fueled by British gold, Frederick William III fielded a disciplined army, strengthened by Bavarian troops under Maximilian IV Joseph, and Hanoverian forces loyal to George III. The Battle of Thorn in August saw a Prussian army led by General Ludwig Georg von Wartenberg destroy the Russians, seizing the Vistula River. Meanwhile, Britain's navy defeated the Franco-Spanish blockade attempt, haranguing French shipping. Despite their European naval woes, the bulk of the French and Spanish fleets were in the Caribbean, engaging in a series of indecisive battles as the British kept reinforcing their presence with nimble ships that made it impossible to force a conclusive battle that Spain desperately needed. In 1804, Prussia struck back in Silesia, retaking Liegnitz, forcing Napoleon north with the Battle of Schweidnitz, where Blücher's army nearly broke the French left flank. Napoleon's quick shift of his reserve corps resulted in a hard-won French victory, breaking the Prussians. Reinforced by the Russians, they quickly marched on Berlin, meeting Prussia's last-ditch army at the Battle of Cottbus. The heavily outnumbered Prussians were decimated by the French marshal, opening the road to Berlin, which quickly fell, forcing Frederick William III to retreat to Königsberg, where he planned to continue the fight. However, devastating news arrived from America. The largest Spanish fleet ever assembled since the Armada of 1588, and reinforced here by France, finally caught the British fleet at the Battle of the Windward Passage. The meager French fleet, under Admiral Villeneuve, lured the larger British one into the Windward Passage, where they were quickly outgunned and in trouble, before a massive Spanish one arrived under Admiral Gravina. Now caught between the two, the British were surrounded with nowhere to run and quickly overwhelmed by the Bourbon fleet, decimating the Royal Navy's West Indies presence. With their navy out of the picture, a lightning campaign commenced as French and Spanish forces quickly invaded and captured Jamaica, the Bahamas, and the Sugar Islands, devastating the British economy. Thousands of new troops arrived on the newly acquired islands, reinforcing the French and Spanish positions, preparing for a British onslaught. When the news of this reached Europe, Prussia and Bavaria knew British aid was gone, so signed the Treaty of Tilsit in November 1804, ending the war. Austria gained Silesia and divided the Bavarian Palatinate with the French, who were ceded the Austrian Netherlands alongside the ancient Carolingian capital of Aix-la-Chapelle. Habsburg attempts to outright annex Bavaria into their crown lands were unanimously opposed, as France and Russia feared it would disturb the balance of power. Prussia's Polish lands were divvied up between Russia and Austria, but the Prussians retained their land connection between Berlin and Königsberg. Britain, limited to a naval power, cut its subsidies, leaving Prussia to face consequences. Massive reparations were placed on the losers, with Hanover remaining under Habsburg occupation until King George III recognized the treaty, as he continued to fight against France and Spain, desperate to reclaim the rich Caribbean. After constructing a massive fleet, the British crossed the Atlantic and won a series of Pyrrhic victories that left them in control of the waves but nowhere to dock, besides the pirate-controlled Viques, who they paid massive sums to harbor, but they were soon out of supplies. Canada was far too distant to manage the theater, and America refused to support them as they honored their arrangement with the French from the Revolution. France and Spain strategized the war for such an occasion, bringing most of their men on land, easily withstanding the British sieges. Finally, the British accepted defeat after continued failures in 1807. The West Indies were lost for good at the Treaty of Amsterdam, split between France and Spain. The war erased France's debt through plunder and territorial gains, solidifying Napoleon as a modern Agrippa to Louis Augustus. Their alliance with Spain and Austria kept France's enemies in check, as the House of Bourbon reigned as the supreme power over the globe. With the war's close, Louis was celebrated all across France, with church bells ringing and crowds shouting, "Vive le roi!" Where did Louis and Napoleon turn their sights on for a new conquest? Italy, Holland, maybe even India? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, click here to watch what could have happened if Napoleon III won the Franco-Prussian War. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and consider supporting me on Patreon to get ad-free viewing, maps, and more. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. I'll see you soon.